Welcome to The Explainer. Look, today we're diving into something deeply serious and honestly pretty chilling. The crimes of Jeffrey Epstein make up one of the most massive, far-reaching national investigations in modern history. But you know what often gets lost when we're painting with those broad global strokes? The local footprint. See, when investigators cast a net this incredibly wide, they capture fragments and traces of activity scattered all over the country, often right in our own backyards. So today, we're going to zoom in specifically on the Southwest Florida connections that were found buried deep inside the official files. Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap your head around the scope of what we're dealing with here, you've got to look at the sheer, overwhelming volume of data. On the Department of Justice website, there's a dedicated database known as the Epstein Library. And within that library, we aren't just talking about a few thousand records, there are millions, literally millions of documents, emails, PDFs, flight logs, and financial records related to the case. It's a massive digital mountain of evidence. Sifting through the whole thing is like looking for a needle in a haystack, which is exactly why analyzing the data geographically provides such a fascinating lens for us. And that brings us to the central mystery of this explainer. What exactly connects a global criminal operation to a place like Southwest Florida? When local journalists from the News Press and Naples Daily News decided to take a magnifying glass to this massive national database, they weren't looking for the broad narrative. They were hunting for local anomalies. They wanted to know if, out of those millions of files, any of those threads led directly to their own communities. And as you're about to see, the answer was a definitive yes. Chapter 1: The Redacted Calls. Let's shift our focus to the very first major anomaly investigators stumbled across, which guides us straight into some specific, highly cryptic communications linked to the coastal city of Naples. Inside a single 99-page file pulled right from the Epstein library, there's this sudden, highly concentrated burst of communication, specifically 92 phone calls. And these aren't scattered over decades either. These 92 calls took place in a remarkably tight window between January 4th and March 16th of 2005. The destination city for every single one of those calls? Naples, Florida. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the clear pattern that emerges when you look at the AT&T detail logs included in the records. The origin of the calls points to a phone owner with an address in Lantana, over in Palm Beach County. The destination is Naples. Now, the vast majority of these line item entries clock in at just 1 single minute. But check out the glaring outlier in the data. On February 8th, 2005, at exactly 3:13 in the afternoon, a call connects from Lantana to Naples and stays connected for 49 minutes. But here is where the suspense of this data really builds, because it's all about the missing information. These records are entirely devoid of context. Every single phone number in these AT&T logs has been completely redacted. All we have are the raw usage entries, showing the date, the billing category, and the time. We don't know who the caller was, we don't know who was picking up the phone in Naples, and we have absolutely zero context as to the purpose of a 49-minute conversation occurring in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in early 2005. It's basically a digital ghost. Chapter 2: Following the Money to Fort Myers. Okay. As we continue piecing this giant puzzle together, we have to shift our investigation a bit, both geographically and thematically. We're moving away from those cryptic, redacted communications in Naples and turning our attention to a very concrete financial trail leading straight into Fort Myers. In early February of 2026, local journalists ran a simple but super revealing keyword search through the DOJ's online database. Searching for Fort Myers turned up 231 distinct references. And these weren't just passing mentions. The library contains everything from random emails to highly specific invoices, like a bill from a Bonita Springs fine arts gallery sent directly to Epstein's home in New York City. But buried within those 231 matches, well, there was a far more significant financial thread. To make sense of this financial trail, we first need to introduce the corporate entity right at the center of it, Jedge Inc. Sometimes it's styled in all caps, but Jedge was a corporation based in the Virgin Islands that conducted business across the U.S., including Florida. Now, according to a 2020 court filing in a lawsuit brought by a victim against the Epstein estate, Jedge Inc. was officially designated and recognized as an Epstein-owned company. He completely controlled it, right up until he sold it to a Georgia businessman in June 2019, which was just a month before his final arrest. And you literally cannot overstate the gravity of Jedge Inc., mainly because of its primary asset. You see, this specific Virgin Islands corporation was the registered owner of Epstein's Boeing 727-100. Yep, that is the notorious private jet widely referred to in the media and by victims as the Lolita Express. This wasn't some random shell company for office supplies. This was the company that operated the literal vehicle of his global trafficking network.
So the crucial point is this exact figure. Between the years 2012 and 2014, roughly $23,000 flowed directly from Xinjiang Inc., again the company that owned that notorious airplane, into the pockets of a local pilot based right in Fort Myers, Florida.
Let's break down the mechanics of this financial trail. The DOJ files show a dozen individual checks issued directly from Gillage Inc. Most of these checks were drawn from Deutsche Bank Trust Company Americas, headquartered in New York City. They were made payable to a man named Christopher Higgins, with one check made out directly to his business. And public LinkedIn records show that Higgins actually founded an airline transport business in 2012 and worked as a chief pilot and flight instructor with Flyrite Aviation, located on Danley Drive in Fort Myers. So the paper trail connecting the Epstein Corporation to the Fort Myers pilot is entirely unambiguous.
However, much like the redacted phone calls in Naples, we are left with the profound suspense of omission. The financial ledgers proudly display the checks, the dates, and the banks, but the files contain absolutely no record of what work, if any, was actually performed. Did Christopher Higgins fly a plane for JH Inc.? The files just don't say. And if he did fly for them, who were the passengers on board? There is no manifest. We have the money, but we're completely missing the physical reality of what that money actually bought.
Now, naturally, you'd want to ask the man himself, right? Well, when a local journalist called Christopher Higgins' phone number on February 12, 2026, Higgins initially identified himself. But the very moment the journalist mentioned that his name and business appeared in the Epstein files, the response was chillingly abrupt. A person on the line simply said, "I'm sorry, I'm not interested," and the phone went dead. Just like that, a closed door to a wide-open question.
Chapter 3, the broader context. To truly grasp the weight of these local Southwest Florida anomalies, we really need to zoom out for a second. We have to ground these specific phone calls and checks back into the grim global reality of the overall case. We can never, ever lose sight of the massive human toll at the center of this data dump. According to the Justice Department, there are more than 1,000 women and children recognized as victims of Epstein. Many of these victims have testified about Epstein Island, officially known as Little St. James, a heavily guarded 70-acre private island he owned in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The paperwork we are looking at isn't just abstract data. It's the administrative footprint of an operation that caused immeasurable harm to over 1,000 lives.
Let's map this out on a timeline, because context is absolutely everything here. Police first began receiving reports regarding Epstein taking inappropriate photos of minors way back in 1996. By 2005, the Palm Beach police opened an investigation into reports involving a 14-year-old. That investigation led to his 2008 guilty plea to a Florida prostitution charge where he served 13 months in a work release program. Finally, in July 2019, he faced federal sex trafficking charges in New York, dying in his cell a month later. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates exactly why the local data matters. Those 92 mysterious Naples phone calls, they happened in early 2005, right as the Palm Beach investigation was quietly heating up. And those Fort Myers pilot payments from 2012 to 2014, they happened right in the middle of his post-conviction era, while he was supposedly a registered offender. The local timeline maps perfectly onto his global crimes.
Which ultimately leaves us right here. The DOJ's Epstein Library isn't just a record of what happened in New York or the Virgin Islands. It's a map of a sprawling, interconnected network. If a simple keyword search can uncover 92 redacted phone calls to Naples and $23,000 paid to a Fort Myers aviation company that owned the Lolita Express, we have to ask ourselves, just how close to home does this massive national scandal actually get? And what other secrets are quietly waiting to be found in those millions of files?